Hello. How's everyone doing? It's been a while since I've done one of these. I don't know how long it's been, a few weeks, maybe. Um, anyways, what are we to talk about today? A lot of stuff has happened since we've last chatted, right? LA, where I am now, has been occupied by federal forces. Some of you may have witnessed the absurdity that was the show of presence by federal forces at MacArthur Park near downtown Los Angeles on Monday. Um, we've had the Texas floods. Trump now apparently doesn't like Vladimir Putin anymore. It's one of the more positive signs in all of this insanity. Um, JD Vance, is talking about his post constitutional order at the Claremont Institute in San Diego. It's a lot of crazy stuff has happened in the last few weeks. A lot to get into. What to talk about? We could talk about all of it, or we could talk about you know um, the through line. What's the through line in this moment? Well, the through line, as I like often talk about, is the fact that we're in an epistemic crisis, a crisis um, of knowledge and communication as a society. Uh, you know, People talk about this in different ways, right? We've lost our sense of shared meaning, our shared story, the sense that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Uh, people talk about this in different ways, but they're all talking about the same thing. Um, uh, you know, we are, we're in a moment of collapse. I talk about this concept of collapse. What do I mean when I say that we're living through collapse? We're living through the disintegration of uh, a whole series of cultural and institutional patterns and inertia that we think of as normal, that we think of as the thing that we need to get back to. But one of the problems that one is going to have to confront is there is no going back to where we've come from. There is only going forward. We are moving rapidly forward towards a different context that's being shaped by the forces of culture, of technology. What is happening with AI right now is greatly consequential. Not to mention, um, major developments in warfare, drone technology, synthetic biology. Uh, these are all concerning things that we need to be paying attention to as a responsible society. But it turns out we are not such a responsible society. We have put very unserious people in charge for reasons we can talk about. I put out a piece on this. I mean, one of the things that is really hard um, about parsing our moment is that there are in fact many truths that are true. It is true that the liberal establishment that the right hates so much lost touch with the working class. I mean, that happened, right? I mean, the Democratic Party kind of has become the party of the rich elite. It has, right? The polls show this. Voter trends reveal this to be the case. So you and the obviously the other big through line there is education. There's a overlap of education and the elite and where they live in coastal cities as opposed to sort of middle America. We know all this, right? These are things we have to confront, right? Certainly doesn't make the fascist right wing response to these complaints um, ethically justified in any way. I mean, and these people, we are facing a fascist moment in this country. Um, but we also have to kind of confront the ways in which power and our institutions have created this opportunity. I write a lot about these tech right reactionaries and their plans and their designs on the future. I've written extensively about Curtis Yarvin at this point, Balaji Srinivasan and his crazy network states. Um, I've written about the sovereign individual, book written by Davidson and Rees Moog. Um, and I've written some pretty, like, I think, like, pretty, like, strong critiques of those of all of those works. Um, but it should be understood, like, it needs to be understood at some level that um, these people were taking advantage of an opportunity that had opened in front of them. When one thinks about this and sort of the narrative arc in their head, there's this sort of tendency to think that there's this sort of natural direction to history, right? That history, like, moves in a certain way, that we were at this end of history, this Fukuyaman end of history, right? That would have gone on forever if not for the conniving ways of the Curtis Yarvins and the Peter Thiels and the Mark Andreessens and the David Saxes of the world. That's not true. That part's not true. What is true is that those people are, yes, they are evil, and they have evil designs that are focused on their own personal ambitions and their own views of the world that they want to impose, with with or without your consent, and with the knobs and levers of state power on their side. That's true, and I write about that, and I've written about their ideology and, like, what's driving them. But they're also opportunists who stepped into an opportunity that was handed to them by um, a bunch of blind spots that this sort of centrist liberal establishment, myself included, by the way, I include myself in this criticism. I am not pretending like I wasn't part of this problem. I was, right? And more than one way. I was blind to some of these forces, until I was forced to confront them. But upon seeing the reality of this, I've clearly made a different decision than some other similarly situated people to myself. Um, you know, um, I've lost friends and colleagues in the tech industry, because upon reflection, I realized that, yeah, I mean, like, what is it that I really care about? Do I care about the ability of Silicon Valley companies and venture capitalists to be able to go and innovate without any restriction at all on their ability to develop new technologies and disrupt everything under the sun? Or do I value community, right? And a sense of nationhood, right? Shared nationhood, shared story, a shared vision for humanity, um, a a backdrop in society that has an answer to the question why, not just how. It's one, it's and this is this is really showing, right? I think what we talk about philosophically when we talk about things like Hume's is ought distinction, Hume's guillotine. Like, we can build rocket ships, we can build computers, we can build AIs, we can do all these things. And for a lot of people, it just seems very obvious we should do these things. We don't often think about the reasons why we do these things. Like, why are we going to Mars? Like, why are we going to Mars? Um, Elon has given his reasons. Some of his reasons include, some sort of insurance policy for the human race, potentially creating a backup plan if we destroy ourselves here on Earth. Civilization could, in theory, continue on some Mars colony. That's a justification that's been given. This necessity. There's other like less insane people like Elon. There's what's his? I can't remember his first name. I know his last name is Zubrin, but he's like I don't know if he's a astronomer or something, or he's somebody who believes that humans a positive human future is very much tied to our capacity to expand into space. We can talk about that, but I mean, why? Why are we going to go to space? I think we should go to space, by the way. I'm not anti-space. I think we should go to space. But I'm stopping here and I'm forcing ourselves to me. Well, it's my show. I can do whatever I want. I'm forcing you with me to confront the why question, right? Like, why do we want to go to space? Like, why am I talking about this? Well, I mean, because this applies to everything, right? Um, like, why build a car? Well, because people want to drive places, right? I mean, why do they want to drive places? Well, for business or for pleasure. The why is really important. The why is where our humanity lives. Um, it's People become very confused, right? This is sort of strange, uh, you know, it's not like it's like some like there might actually be like a term for it, and I'm embarrassed that I don't know it if it exists, but like it's like a, it's like a weird sort of this technological. Well, I mean, I guess you could call it like technological determinism, right? Um, which I think someone who I've openly criticized and doesn't like me, I think that openly embraced recently. This notion that technology, their technological mode, right, the landscape of our technological capabilities is what forms sort of the the backdrop of our history, and that technology is what leads us towards an inevitable history. I think this is like a very dangerous thought. Like an example of this is, maybe just like pull this back a little bit to be a little more clear about what I'm saying. The notion that, we have AI now, for example, we're going to have AI, we're going to have AGI. A technological determinist will say, well, it's going to happen anyways. So we need to just like, we need to, as humans, adapt to the environment that AGI will create for us. This is the determinist view, that essentially technology is in the driver's seat, not humans. Um, and I think this is like, whether a lot of people in, especially on the tech right, whether they'll admit it or not, are technological determinists, right? The Sovereign Individual, right, was a technological determinist book. It painted a future in which nation states would simply not be able to exist anymore as a side effect, or as a kind of a contingency of the fact that, the hyper individuation that we might expect to see in a hyper connected world would sort of negate this idea of having, a nation state like structure. and that this is just inevitable. This is just how it's going to be, right? People are going to have cryptocurrency, and they're going to have passphrases in their heads, and the government won't be able to get at that. So you won't be able to force people to pay taxes, which means there won't be a tax base, so there can't be a welfare state. This is the technological determinist thinking that, say, like Balaji Srinivasan, like, you know, subscribes to. And I am, quite frankly, very hostile to this view. My view, to put it mildly, is, well, fuck that. If like if the technology is going to force us to uh, be, hyper neo feudalist, then we need to direct the development of that technology democratically, because that's an unacceptable outcome, quite frankly. And that's my position, and I don't apologize for that. I mean, that makes people, and that makes other liberals, by the way, I'm a liberal, but that makes some liberals uncomfortable, like market liberals, liberals who, I'm, I mean, I do think that the market is the best way we have to allocate scarce resources. Don't get me wrong, but I also think that there is a serious and legitimate place for democratic deliberation in terms of, like, shaping markets. Like, we get to say, like, we talk about things, right? Like, should we allow gambling or ban gambling, or, legalize drugs or not? Like, we have social policies, right? These things shape markets, right? These are downstream of, like, normative positions that we as a society, work through democratic deliberation. And I think that's good, right? You know, I I have pretty nuanced views about recreational drugs. I think there's a lot of recreational drugs that should be legal. I think there's some that should probably stay illegal, right? I mean, and some people might disagree with me on that, and that's fine. That's what democracy is, right? That's bringing our human values into the democratic process and hashing it out and trying to shape markets to reflect those collective values. That's good. That's a good thing. We should do more of that. Sometimes we'll make mistakes. Sometimes we'll pass a policy, and 5 years later, we're like, this did not go the way we planned. I would say that there's lots of examples of this, right? I mean, um, there's been a lot of bad policies. I think that, a good example, right, that I often talk about, and this is something that is talked about by the abundance agenda people, and I know that the progressive folks hate the abundance people, but I do think that the progressives should pay somewhat more careful attention to, like, what is actually said, right? In those arguments, here's this is actually a true fact. Like, you can, like, look this up, right? And this is one of the reasons that we saw this massive rollback of CEQA, right? The CEQA, right? It's a California environmental act, right? There's a federal law called NEPA that kind of is sort of a federal version of it, but it's it was passed, I think it was, like, in 1970 in California. And it's a law that creates the sort of the mandatory environmental assessments. Whenever you, like, build something, you have to, like, make sure that it doesn't, like, impact, like, migratory birds and things like that, and all the, things that are, like, real ecological concerns. But um one of the things that people, the abundance agenda people, have been talking about, and I feel like progressives don't want to confront, is that these kinds of laws have just been, like, abused, right? Like, CEQA was essentially used to prevent the building of new dormitories at Berkeley, if you live in Berkeley, you know about this. You know about how the university like wanted to build more student housing, and it was tied up in court under environmental review, by local residents who simply didn't want that building to be built, and on in the guise of environmental legislation. Um, Other examples of this that are like just absolutely perverse are solar and wind and grid scale battery projects in California that have been tied up in the courts for years, by lawsuits from environmentalists. One of the things that's like crazy about like the environmental movement is, you have like there's like climate change activists, right? And those that part of the environmental movement, is generally like pretty pro, renewable energy. But then you have like kind of the conservationist environmentalist movement, and they're a little bit more nuanced. They're more like, we see those solar panels you're building over there. We don't really think you should cut down those trees to put those solar panels there. This is and that can like that leads to like a Sika lawsuit, and then like it's like 3 years goes by without that solar farm getting built. And that has actually so those that kind of like dynamic, which really doesn't get talked about like openly, like within like, the left coalition. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. Like we're not being we're we can't have rational responsive policy if we don't like bring these things up and confront them directly. I mean, and this is like one of the reasons like why like the Democratic Party is like just so fucked, right? Is that, you know they like really, I mean, the party doesn't really like have these like debates internally. They just like have a consultant class and like focus groups that like try to find like these lowest common denominator like things that will like bring the groups together, and they assemble the talking points. But you don't get like a politician that just kind of says like, guys, don't you think it's like fucking crazy that like it's actually that there are environmentalists that are stopping us from building renewable energy? Like, isn't this a fuck? I mean, obviously there are politicians that care about this, because Gavin Newsom and just like forced through a major reform here in California that actually addresses this. And it scales back these environmental laws quite a bit, for things like affordable housing and renewable energy, which was just like it's an insane like feature, right, of like left-wing politics, that this is like some sort of like third rail that you just can't talk about, right? And you have like just insane groups like the Sierra Club and stuff that just like live off of like NEPA and Sika lawsuits. And it's and there's the tension between sort of sustainable energy, climate change, and conservationists is like it's like a real tension within the environmental movement, and they don't agree on everything. I mean, a lot of conservationist environmentalists, and we just have to say this, like they don't think that we should build massive amounts of renewable energy necessarily. They just think that we should consume a lot less energy, and that we should scale back our lifestyles, and we should stop flying on planes and stop driving in cars, and just like start living out of gardens in our backyard, and sort of become more agrarian, like fucking Pol Pot, you know like like dreamed of, and led to the Cambodian killing fields. But so I'm not to say that they're all that extreme, but like this is like, these are like debates that just like don't happen, and it's crazy. Um and I do think that like having some of these debates would actually drive a lot more political engagement and could actually make things a lot better. Because I think if you put a lot of these things in front of people, I think you could get like 60-70% of Americans to agree on most things. The problem is that, the way that our political coalitions work is you end up with all of these like third rails and all of these things that are off the table. Um, because there's just this weird dynamic that emerges, this sort of coalitional management. Oh, if we say this will piss off the conservationists. If we say this, it'll piss off the the centrists. If we say this, it'll piss off the progressives. If we say this, it'll upset the LGBTQ people. Like, it's like, you can't do politics that way. You need to bring stakeholders to the table. You need to like be like, we have a problem here. We have a planet that's going to like overheat, and the ice caps are going to melt, and so we have to have an energy transition. And we're not going to be able to convince people to become voluntarily poor and agrarian. So we're going to need a lot more energy. We're just going to need that. um, that's going to involve building some stuff. It's going to involve building a lot of stuff, quite frankly. And we want, and to be clear, we're going to like build some things that are clean. We're going to build some solar and wind, maybe some advanced geothermal, maybe nuclear, modern nuclear, safe nuclear power. Sorry, Greenpeace, like we may have to do some of that. Everything is about like risk benefit here, guys. This carbon dioxide problem is a real serious problem. And just like bring people to the table, and talk these things through, rather than like treating these things like political third rails like we currently do, which is like left the Democratic Party in complete like paralysis. There's of course, there's some good things happening. Like I do think that the abundance guys are making a lot of good points. And I think, like, honestly, if I'm just going to put my cards on the table here, I mean, I think that the abundance people and a lot of the progressive people are like talking past each other, because like here's what I think. I agree with the progressive left on the fact that capital and business interests and corporate power has gotten out of the cage. It's clearly operating outside of law. It's clearly taken on power of a political character that is unacceptable in a republic. We can't have that. So yeah, I mean, like, bring on the antitrust, and bring on the regulations. I'm all for that. I think, yeah, I mean, like, do I think billionaires should run the world? No, I don't think that. Let's not do that. Let's take their power away, and let's do it quickly. We need to overturn Citizens United. This is really important. We need to like have campaign finance reform. Now, does that mean that I think that like we should like fucking like go full fucking Lenin and like start like expropriating the wealth of like rich people? I don't think that'll end really well. I don't think we should do that. I think that'd be bad. That's what we saw in Venezuela with Hugo Chavez and his Bolivarian revolution. Things went off the rail there. We shouldn't do that. That's not my recommendation. But what I do think is that, yeah, like we need to deal with wealth inequality in a big way. And that does mean some redistribution. That does mean higher taxes on the wealthy. And I say that as someone who will, I mean, I've done well for myself. I'll be affected by those taxes, and good for and honestly, like, yes, I should be affected by those taxes, because fuck, I mean, I value this country immensely. I mean, I think that the project of the American Republic, the self government, is so precious. I mean, personally, I'd give up all of my money, right, to save the country, because I'm crazy like that. I mean, I gave up my career. Um, I think wealthy people, need to have a sense of noblesse oblige, a sense of noble obligation, you know, to the country. Um, what I honestly just don't understand, like, I mean, I made a little bit of money in my life, and I've gotten to, enjoy things. Is that like I never thought, like, having some money would mean that, like, I would turn around and then do everything I could to maximize my own personal ego to the to the detriment of everyone else, right? It's like it's like you know I look at these super rich like billionaires now who are like trying to build a fucking monarchist like oligarchy. And my question is like why aren't you happy with your fucking like you know $300 million yacht? Like, why isn't that enough? Sail around in your $300 million yacht and leave our fucking democracy alone. Like, I mean, I just like, you know, yeah, I mean, I've never understood that. I obviously, there's not all rich people are like this, right? Like some are very philanthropic, right? But I mean, this band of rich people that has assembled themselves around Donald Trump and the Republican Party, and honestly, like some of the sort of centrists as well, who are sort of pearl clutching, over the New York City mayoral race. Um, I mean, like Mondami is like he's not a communist. I mean, he's on the left, right? I mean, he has some ideas that I think should be debated. And let me talk about this for a second as well. Like, just kind of come back to this about having these debates, because these debates like need to be had. Um, like government run grocery stores. I think that's a terrible idea. I think that's a terrible idea. But I think the stance of say like these like professional moderates, as I call them, that are like, whoa, how can I vote for the Democratic Party if like this guy becomes mayor of New York City? I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, even if you're right, even if you're right that these grocery stores, these government run grocery stores, are communist and socialist and awful and are going to be a failure. um just doesn't seem to be like an equitable concern on the scale of Donald Trump having over 10,000 like loyal goons that operate outside of law and rendition American citizens and non-citizens alike, to detention camps and things like that. I mean, just does not seem to be in the same level of concern. Like, I'd be more than happy to like, talk to Zoran, or debate Zoran and be like, Zoran, like, I mean, I honestly like his like, I think his goals, like his like summum bonum and mine are the same, and we might have some disagreement with like how to go about it. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's what you would expect, like from like intellectually honest moderates to do, would be to engage in the debate, to be like, hey, like, do you think that having government run I mean, government really shouldn't run grocery stores, guys. I mean, like grocery stores are like pretty like, they don't make that much profit, honestly. Like, seriously, like I dare you to kind of go into the sort of the fine, like go on like CNBC or Bloomberg and look at like the earning statements of like grocery store chains. I mean, they make like 2-3% profit margin, like tops, right? These are like, there's so much competition in the grocery space that the difference between like wholesale and like what you buy like off the shelf is like a tiny percentage. This is not a place where we need the government's help. But like, there are places, but that doesn't mean that like the government shouldn't like intervene in the economy. It doesn't mean that like we shouldn't like raise taxes on wealthy people. We absolutely should do that. We should absolutely we absolutely need to get to a place where all Americans have health care. We absolutely need to get to a place where kids don't have to like starve in the richest country in the world. Like, cutting like school lunch programs, like, why the fuck are we doing that? um we should be expanding those programs. um so I think like my big frustration with the left is the fact that it's seemingly just incapable of like having rational conversations about these things. Um, you have fiefdoms within fiefdoms, right? Uh, y- I mean, honestly, like one of the reasons why like I don't really consider myself a progressive is like I find I mean I haven't really critiqued progressives like at all really much, but I guess now I will. Is that there's a puritanism sometimes in progressivism that I don't really like feel is productive. I feel like progressives do historical moral accounting in a way that I think is, and I'll talk about that. That's like an important thing. I'll come back to that. In a way that I think is just like leaves us like unable to move forward productively. Um, I mean, I lived in Berkeley for like I don't know how many years I lived in Berkeley. But yeah, I mean, like the progressive left there like drove me insane. I'll tell you how they drove me insane. By constantly like wanting to raise property taxes to address homelessness while not allowing any new housing whatsoever to be built within the city limits. And then coming up with every excuse under the sun when a developer wanted to build apartments, down on San Pablo or where the hell they were like trying to build these things, which in some cases like actually included affordable housing units as part of the plan. And then these like fuckers will just like go to court and just basically be like this ruins the character of the neighborhood, or or the developers or the private developers are going to profit off of this should be government built housing. And it's just this insane puritanism that like progressives can get themselves into, where like nothing can get done. um I think like, Ezra Klein is sort of like critique this like as well, like as like sort of like the everything bagel, like like liberalism or whatever, where you can't really do anything unless it like ticks every single like social justice and like social activist like box, and it just leaves you in this like state of paralysis where you can't build the house, because it's like by the time you've like dealt with like all of the necessary like research and into the potential land claims of the native tribes that once lived there, and then like the environmental like analysis, and the like whether or not the development is like meets like certain sustainability goals and like all these other things, like you just like reach this point where like it's just not feasible to build the project. It's just so expensive and so time consuming that the developer just gives up. It's not economically feasible. Yeah, and in that world, I think progressivism like runs into, you know, uh, just like a place of just like ungovernability. And so that's like one of my sort of critiques of progressivism, and why I don't really place myself there. But on the other hand, like I think that progressives are do make sometimes good arguments about the nature of economic power, and how it uh intrudes on the our political arrangement, such as it is our system of self-government. And so we need to reconcile these things. So what I think the thing that brings all of these things together is like, yeah, I mean, I think we need, a I mean, I don't think we should repeat like the New Deal, right? I think the New Deal made a lot of mistakes, right? I mean, I think the National Recovery Administration and price controls and things like that were a fucking disaster. We shouldn't do that again. But from the perspective of, you know, looking at corporate power, wealth disparity, the insane state of healthcare in this country, uh, you know, the the housing situation, a housing crisis. We have a housing crisis in this country. I think that, yeah, I mean, I think we need something like a New Deal 2.0, and I think that comes from having some real serious conversations about what is it that we want to accomplish as a country. I have my own views. I try to not to talk. Like, I've tried to like be a commentator that doesn't necessarily advance my own policy prescriptions. You don't see much of that in my writing or on these Substack lives. One, because I want to practice like some degree of like humility, because I've been wrong enough. I mean honestly, I thought I thought like free trade with China was like a good fucking idea for most of my adult life. And in over the last like 6 or 7 years, right, that view has sort of shifted. I sort of see it as a kind of a historic mistake that we allowed ourselves to buy into this notion that liberal trade with illiberal countries would liberalize those countries. We've seen basically the opposite happen. So I've had to update my view on this. And my in my updated view, like such as it is that we should still have relatively free trade. But when it comes to trading with regimes that are not democratic, that are illiberal, we need to make sure that like that we're not doing anything that undermines our own values in that trading. Um, like, and I'm not even saying that we shouldn't trade with China, but I definitely think that the way that we allowed Western supply chains to sort of decamp for Shenzhen, and that the manufacturing supercluster there, which has given China like massive amount of leverage in the global economy, like geopolitical leverage, and and geostrategic leverage over us. We're also seeing our dependence on the Chinese supply chain uh, for rare earth minerals. We put way too much stock in the neoliberal notion that liberal markets would bring about democracy in China. I mean, that was something that I know that the early neoliberals had hoped for, right? Margaret Thatcher was like very hopeful in the handover of Hong Kong to China, that Hong Kong's you know uh, more democratic ways would sort of infect mainland China. um, that did not happen. In Hong Kong has been well subjugated. So we have to update our priors there, right? That was a bad mistake. Bad mistake. Thinking that free markets would necessarily lead to free people. What happened, as we all now know, is that the Communist Party in China, they became capitalists, and they they now use and shape those markets to serve their own power. And that's what this ascendant oligarchy in the United States seeks to do as well. And so we stand on the precipice of that. And this is a very, very, I mean, it's the most dangerous moment in human history. And that may sound hyperbolic, because you're like, well, Mike, we had World War II, there was like the Cold War. I mean, we're in far, far more danger as a civilization than we've ever been. Um, I mean, just think about the nature of the risks that we're now exposed to. It's not just nuclear weapons. Um, you know, I mean, we're probably going to see like people being assassinated by autonomous drones in the next 5 to 10 years. We're going to see with AI and breakthroughs like Google's AlphaFold, in synthetic biology, you're going we're the capacity for building biological weapons and potentially for like no, like there you can buy gene printers. Like there are gene printers. Like the worry here is that like you get to a point where we have way dangerous material at the consumer grade, and the war in Ukraine has been a demonstration of that. That war is being fought with like basically with bombs tied to consumer grade drones. And if we're getting to a world where we have like, anyone can, I mean, I don't know how expensive gene printers are right now, but like one imagines they're coming down in price, and you have the combination of AI and gene printers and the ability to basically like just like basically print bacteria, and have some AI design some like biological super weapon. We have to start worrying about like terrorist groups, like worrying about like religious radicals around the world getting access to that technology, as it becomes cheaper and more ubiquitous. These are very scary threats that if we were a serious world that wasn't dealing with these power struggles as we are, these ascendant oligarchs who are trying to take control, maybe we'd all be meeting in New York City at the United Nations and talking about regulating these things on a global basis, because these are very scary things that could wipe out the entire human population. We're not talking, I mean, people are talking about it. There are people that deal with these existential, risk analyses. And, if you talk to them, they're pretty alarmed. They think it's like 2 minutes to midnight. And we're not exactly in a place like as a society, and as a polity, to address them, because right now we're worrying about Donald Trump's daily whims. You know this is not a good, like, so like, we have this is the sort of the backdrop of risk that we don't really think about. We're very worried about our democracy. We do need to be worried about our democracy, because it is through our democracy that we can potentially bring these problems under control. Because like these motherfuckers from Silicon Valley, like, like the Mark Andreessens of the world, talking about effective accelerationism. They're trying to like build some like special economic zone city in Northern California where like the laws don't apply. I mean, these motherfuckers just want to go and like build these technologies on full throttle, without any regulation, without any oversight. We absolutely cannot let them do that. That is a existential risk of the nth degree. If people think COVID was bad, just imagine like what's in store for us in the coming years, when some extremist group or some government or some experiment gone wrong in the private sector, creates a virus that is like 10 times more infectious than COVID, and is 100% lethal. Like, I mean, that's possible. That's possible. It's scientifically plausible. That could just be something where someone sits down at their fucking AI and says, AI, design me a virus, design me a DNA or an RNA sequence that you can print off this gene printer, and place into a eukaryotic cell, and then have it replicate. I mean, that's possible. That's possible. And we're getting scared, and the technologies to do that are available today. Obviously limited to advanced research labs and pharmaceutical companies. But I mean, we're really not taking that threat seriously as a society. COVID should have been a wake-up call, but apparently the lesson that we all learned from COVID is that we shouldn't have any kinds of public health response at all. That's the view of Republicans now. In the next pandemic, we will do nothing. We will leave it up to everyone's individual recognizance to deal with themselves in the great like libertarian spirit of America. That I mean, that's not going to cut it if we end up facing one of these threats. And we probably will face these threats. I mean, just game it out. So so that's why I say that we live at the most dangerous moment in history, literally the most dangerous moment in history, because we're building technologies that we don't fully understand, cannot control, and uh, we have a group of oligarchs that have successfully thrown wrenches in the gears of regulation. You have like David Sachs, right? This seditious motherfucker from Silicon Valley, who recycles Putin's talking points and is the you know I mean I mean, this guy that's been this guy's mission. This guy's mission has been to disable the government's ability to bring any regulation on this class of technology, and they just want to race towards that future. And honestly, like they have designs on creating like that. I mean, the reason why they want to create this special economic zone, by the way, like and they have this like this praxis project that Teal and like others are running, is because they want to create they call them, Balaji Srinivasan calls them like network states. They want to create parallel governance structures that emerge from inside a sort of like a corporate order that eventually like subsumes the traditional nation state, which leads to this sort of like digital neo-feudal, world. Curtis Yarvin's opinion is that these worlds should have monarchs, corporate monarchs, neo-cameralist monarchs, as he describes them. And these people like really like believe that that's where things are headed. And it's very, very dangerous. Uh, we're on one hand, like we have to pay attention to the fact that their political maneuvers are very serious threats to our republic and our system of self-government and to other democracies across the world. But we also like need to pay attention to how dangerous the technologies that they're wielding actually are. They're very dangerous. We haven't talked about AI much because AI gets talked about all the time, and people, already have their fears there. Synthetic biology is like the one angle that doesn't get talked about enough, which is I think is like far scarier than AI in the near to intermediate term. And there's some people who believe that like China's already engaged in like eugenics, like that they're already like genetically modifying babies, and like there's some speculation that kind of thing is happening. Like we're like that, yeah. Like if you've seen the world, like the movie Gattaca, right? Like we're moving into a world where like those ethical questions are very immediately relevant, and we're not talking about them. We're talking about the latest, the latest like insanity out of the White House. So we're literally distracting ourselves towards the ultimate catastrophe for humanity. And I mean that to me, if people ask me like what I worry about, it's that. Um, I think over the next 10 to 15 years, the battle for democracy is readily winnable. I think that these fascists will ultimately fail in their attempt to consolidate power as a consequence of the incoherence of their own, of their own project, right? I mean, you see this with the Epstein stuff as an example of this, right? I mean, one of the ways in which this sort of ascendant oligarchical political class has achieved power has been by cynically knitting together political coalitions by, leveraging things like like the Epstein, conspiracy theory, like QAnon, things like that. And the truth is, these like cynical motherfuckers like Elon Musk and others that exploit these things don't actually really believe in these conspiracies. They're just like useful for controlling people, to get them to vote for them so they can then consolidate power. But achieving power in that way, sets the conditions for your own destruction, right? Because eventually, it becomes unavoidable that you've essentially like played people off of each other, that you've told lies. When you make certain promises about what you'll do with power and it turns out you can't do it because it's not possible, that you made the whole thing up. um, that creates like sort of the dynamics that we're now seeing play out with Epstein. And so that's why I think that like ultimately all fascist movements will self-destruct on a long enough timeline. The real question is, you know, how much blood will be spilt along the way. And now, given the fact that we live in a world with nuclear weapons and AI and synthetic biology, will we even like make it to the other side? Or will we wipe ourselves out? That's the real sort of like risk that I see. I think that taking those risks aside, I think that the battle for liberal democracy is very winnable. I don't think we're going to win it next year in the midterms. I don't even think we're going to win it in 2028, even if we take the White House back, um, away from these motherfuckers. I mean, when you think when you the thing is about politics, right? Is that they I don't know. I don't know how to I don't know to make this point, but generally speaking, most people's concept of politics is massively oversimplified, and as a result of sort of like the um, how we've sort of like told the story to ourselves around like how politics works and like how it functions. And there's gradations of sort of the fallacious reasoning around fallacious political reasoning. A lot of people think that politics is about policies. It's about a set of policies. Politics is about like, what are your views on abortion? What do you think the tax rate should be? What do you think the tariff rates should be? That's like, I mean, these are these things are politics, yes, right? But policy deliberation, in a sense, is sort of the most sort of like civil and kind of highest form of like a well functioning politics. A badly functioning politics like the one we have right now has almost nothing to do with that and has everything to do with who has the power, um, and who has power over who. And that is ultimately like the nature of our politics right now. So what that means is the fact that we've reached that point in our politics. And by the way, we have been here before, right, in the United States, right? The Civil War, the sort of the robber baron era of the late 19th century. um and I know Heather Cox Richardson has who writes letters from an American like Substack. She's talked about how this moment has a lot of similarities to the late 19th century America, um, and the robber baron era. Um, and so politically, right, like we can look back and we can find some reason to hope that that these people will ultimately fail. And there's a lot of reasons to think they will, right? I mean, like, look at the Epstein thing again, right? Like there's an incoherence to their narrative, they are stealing from us, right? Like Trump is stealing from us. These are like they are engaged in kleptocratic theft from Americans. And at a certain point, when people's material conditions start to deteriorate and people start trying to figure out who's to blame, those things are going to become a lot more salient in people's thinking. And that's when you might get like a massive like populist uprising that could lead to something like a New Deal 2.0. I think there's a lot of reason to like hope for something like that. That's certainly like the direction I would like to steer things if I have any influence, and my influence is very, very tiny. I am a to the degree that I'm a public intellectual, I am a tiny one. But I would say that um, there's a lot of reason to hope there. But there's also a lot of reason to worry along the way. I mean, uh, how much blood will be spilt by these people? I mean, I mean, I I'm I do think like we are going to have a moment, right, where this administration goes way too far. Protesters get killed, something like that. You know, like late 1960s all over again. And I do think that I do think there are dark times ahead, and I think it's going to get much much darker. Uh, but I also think that in that darkness, they're planting the seeds of their own demise. Um, and and we're seeing that we're seeing the beginnings of resistance, but I think we have much further to go down this path of authoritarian consolidation, unfortunately. So when I tell people like what I think, like like I think this is a 10-year fight across the entire Western world. I think it took us some time to get here. I think the collapse of legitimacy among the sort of liberal centrists is a catastrophe. People don't trust experts. They don't trust the political parties. They don't trust their government. They don't trust the Supreme Court. I mean, coming back from that, the amount of distrust that Americans have in these foundational institutions is not something that one election can fix. Um, Historically, it's something that tragedy and crisis and a deliberate popular movement sweeping to power, right? FDR, right? Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Great Depression being sort of a example of like how that culminated. Something like that. I mean, but I certainly don't wish for any of this, right, to happen. But I am, I am predicting that this is going to get much, much worse before it gets better. But as you all know, I'm an optimist, and so to that I say, it's always darkest before the dawn. Um, and I think America's worth fighting for, and so I fight for her every day. Anyways, um, that's my thoughts for today. Um, I know I was promised to do these more frequently, and then sometimes I dick off for like several weeks, like I did this time. But I'll try to do them more frequently. I think I'm doing a Substack live with someone tomorrow. I'll promote that. I need to go into my email and figure out who it is that I'm doing that Substack live with. But I'll let you all know. Thank you everyone for showing up. Video will be posted later. Bye bye.